I never thought my own daughter would look me in the eyes and say the words that shattered what was left of my crumbling world. Mom, we can't have you at Sarah's wedding. Your condition. It would be too embarrassing, too unpredictable. The way she said condition, like I was some diseased animal that needed to be hidden away from polite society, like I had become something shameful that decent people shouldn't have to witness. As I stood there in her pristine kitchen, with its gleaming granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that cost more than I used to make in 6 months, watching her avoid my gaze while she folded wedding invitations that would never reach my mailbox, I felt something die inside me that I didn't even know was still alive. The morning sunlight streaming through her bay windows seemed to mock me, illuminating the careful distance she maintained between us. She stood on the far side of the kitchen island, as if my diagnosis was contagious, as if being too close to me might somehow infect her with the same forgetfulness that was supposedly consuming my mind. Her manicured fingers worked methodically through the cream-colored invitations, each one embossed with gold lettering that spelled out a future I would not be allowed to witness. "Sarah," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended, "I'm still your mother. I raised you. I was there for every important moment of your life. Don't I deserve to be there for this one?" She finally looked up at me then, and what I saw in her eyes was worse than anger or frustration. It was pity, cold, clinical pity, mixed with something that looked dangerously close to disgust. "Mom, you called me at 3 in the morning last week asking if I was okay because you thought I was still living in that studio apartment from college. You haven't lived there in 8 years. You asked me the same question about my job 4 times in one phone conversation. David's family doesn't need to see that. Everyone forgets things sometimes," I protested. But even as I said it, I could hear how weak it sounded. "I'm not incompetent. I'm not dangerous. I just need a little more patience sometimes." "This isn't about patience," Sarah snapped, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. "This is about the fact that you're not the mother I remember anymore. You're this confused woman who looks like her, but you're not her. The mother I remember would understand why I can't risk having you ruin the most important day of my life." The words hit me like physical blows, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island to steady myself, feeling the cool granite under my palms, trying to anchor myself to something solid in a world that suddenly felt like quicksand. "When did I become such a burden to you?" I whispered. Sarah's expression softened slightly, but not enough. "Mom, it's not that you're a burden. It's complicated. David's parents are very traditional, very proper. His mother has been planning this wedding for months, and everything has to be perfect. If you got confused during the ceremony, or if you started talking about Dad like he was still alive, or if you couldn't remember people's names, I would never embarrass you intentionally," I said, and I hated how much I sounded like I was begging. "I could sit in the back. I could stay quiet. You could assign someone to keep an eye on me if you're that worried." "David's cousin is a doctor," Sarah continued as if I hadn't spoken. "He specializes in elder care, and if he started asking questions about your condition, about why we're not doing more to help you, about whether you should still be living alone." She shook her head, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light. "It would raise too many questions we're not ready to answer. Before I continue with this story that will change everything you think you know about family loyalty and the devastating power of shame dressed up as concern, let me take you back to where it all began. Because sometimes the cruelest betrayals are the ones that grow slowly, like poisonous vines, choking the life out of love so gradually that you don't even notice until it's too late. The house on Maple Street was where I raised my 3 children, Rebecca, Michael, and little Sarah. Those walls held 37 years of Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. But they also held secrets I'm only now beginning to understand. The 2-story colonial with its white picket fence and red front door had been our dream home when Robert and I bought it in 1987. We were young and optimistic then, believing that love and hard work could build an unshakable foundation for our family. The smell of that house still comes back to me sometimes. Fresh coffee in the morning, the lavender fabric softener I used on the children's clothes, the vanilla candles I lit during bath time to make the bathroom feel more soothing. In the kitchen, there was always the lingering scent of whatever I'd baked that week. Chocolate chip cookies for school lunch boxes, banana bread when the fruit got too ripe, birthday cakes decorated with more enthusiasm than skill. I remember the weight of baby Sarah in my arms during those early morning feedings, how she would grab my finger with her tiny fist while I hummed lullabies my own mother had sung to me in Spanish. Duérmete mi niña, duérmete mi sol, I would whisper, the words carrying the weight of generations of mothers before me. The morning light would filter through the yellow curtains in her nursery, curtains I had sewn myself during my pregnancy, working late into the night on my old Singer sewing machine while Robert watched television downstairs. The fabric had tiny dancing bears on it, and Sarah would stare at them with wide, curious eyes while I rocked her back to sleep. Sometimes I would trace the outline of her perfect little fingers, marveling at how something so small and fragile could make me feel so fierce and protective. I would breathe in that sweet baby smell, a combination of Johnson's baby powder and something indefinably precious that all babies seem to carry with them, and promise her silently that I would always protect her, always be there when she needed me, always fight for her happiness even if it cost me my own. How could I have known that one day she would be the one I needed protection from? Rebecca was my responsible one, born with worry lines already etched into her forehead, and an old soul that sometimes made me sad. Even as a 3-year-old, she would line up her toys in perfect rows, organizing her stuffed animals by size and color with a precision that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. Her room was always immaculate, her clothes folded neatly in her drawers, her homework completed days before it was due. When Sarah was born, 5-year-old Rebecca appointed herself as my assistant, helping me fold tiny clothes and showing me which cry meant hungry versus tired versus wet diaper. She had an uncanny ability to interpret baby Sarah's needs, often understanding what Sarah wanted before I did. "Mama," she would say in her serious little voice, standing in the doorway of the nursery with her hands clasped behind her back. "Baby Sarah needs her diaper changed. I can smell it from my room." Rebecca was the one who would remind me about parent-teacher conferences, would help me balance the checkbook when Robert worked late, which became more and more frequent as the years went on, would make sure Michael and Sarah had their permission slips signed for field trips. Even as a child, she carried the weight of keeping our family organized, as if she somehow knew that the adults couldn't be trusted to handle everything properly. I should have seen it then, the way she watched me for signs of failure, the way she stepped in to manage things that should have been my responsibility. I thought it was just her personality, her natural inclination toward order and control. I didn't realize she was already learning not to trust me completely, already preparing herself to take over when I inevitably let everyone down. "Mom, you forgot to pack lunch for Michael again," she would say, not accusingly, but with the weary resignation of someone who had learned to expect disappointment. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but she would already have a backup plan: crackers from her own lunch, an apple from the fruit bowl, something to make sure her little brother didn't go hungry because their mother had been distracted. Michael was my dreamer, my artist, my sensitive boy who felt everything too deeply. He would spend hours in the backyard building elaborate forts out of cardboard boxes and fallen branches, creating entire worlds where knights rescued princesses and dragons could be tamed with kindness instead of violence. His imagination was a beautiful, wild thing that I nurtured with trips to the library, art supplies from the dollar store, and patient listening as he spun tales that grew more elaborate with each telling. "Mom, what if trees could talk?" he asked me one afternoon when he was 7, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he sketched in his composition notebook. "What if they were trying to tell us secrets, but we just didn't know how to listen?" "Maybe they are," I told him, sitting down beside him on the back porch steps where we often had our best conversations. "Maybe you're the one who's supposed to figure out how to hear them." He looked at me with such hope in his eyes, such faith in my wisdom that it broke my heart a little. Michael believed I had all the answers, believed I could guide him through any confusion or fear. When he couldn't sleep because of nightmares about monsters hiding in his closet, he would climb into bed between Robert and me, his small body trembling until I wrapped my arms around him and whispered stories about brave little boys who conquered their fears. "Tell me about the boy who wasn't afraid of the dark," he would whisper against my shoulder, and I would make up stories on the spot about children who discovered that darkness was just light taking a nap, about monsters who turned out to be friendly creatures who were just looking for someone to understand them. Michael would listen with rapt attention, his breathing gradually becoming deeper and more relaxed as my words chased away his fears. Now he can barely look me in the eye when he visits, as if my illness might be catching, as if spending too much time with me might somehow damage his own carefully constructed adult life. The boy who once believed I could fix anything now sees me as something that can't be fixed, only managed. And Sarah, oh, Sarah was my sunshine, my golden girl, my baby, who never stopped smiling until the world taught her that some things aren't worth smiling about. She had this laugh that could fill an entire room, infectious and pure, like church bells ringing on a clear morning. She would dance around the kitchen while I cooked dinner, spinning in her little pink dress until she got dizzy and collapsed in giggles on the linoleum floor. "Mama, watch me," was her constant refrain. "Mama, look what I can do." And I always watched. Even when I was exhausted from working double shifts at the hospital, even when the bills were piling up and Robert was coming home later and later with explanations that didn't quite make sense, even when my own mother was calling to complain about her ailments and my sister was asking to borrow money again, I always stopped what I was doing to watch Sarah perform her latest dance or show me a picture she had colored or demonstrate how high she could jump. Sarah had a way of making ordinary moments feel magical. She would turn grocery shopping into a treasure hunt, bedtime into a theatrical performance, rainy afternoons into adventures. She saw wonder everywhere, in the way sunlight caught in spider webs, in the patterns that frost made on the windows, in the stories that clouds told as they drifted across the sky. "Look, Mama," she would say, pointing at a particularly interesting cloud formation. "That one looks like a dragon, and that one looks like a castle, and they're having a tea party." I would follow her gaze and try to see what she saw, letting her imagination infect my own tired perspective. Those moments of seeing the world through her eyes were some of the most precious gifts of my life, reminders that magic was still possible even in the midst of adult worries and responsibilities. I thought I was building something unbreakable with my children, a foundation of love so solid that nothing could crack it, a bond so deep that no illness or hardship could ever come between us. I measured my success as a mother by their happiness, their achievements, their confidence in my unwavering support. I worked extra shifts to pay for Rebecca's piano lessons, spent weekends driving Michael to art classes across town, sacrificed my own social life to be available for every soccer game, every school play, every moment when they might need me. The house on Maple Street became a hub of activity, sleepovers and study groups, birthday parties and holiday gatherings. I was the mom who always said yes to hosting events, who made sure there were enough snacks and drinks, who didn't mind the chaos of children running through the house or the mess they left behind. Other parents would joke that their kids liked my house better than their own, and I took it as a compliment. "Your mom is so cool," Sarah's friends would tell her. "She actually listens when we talk to her, and she doesn't treat us like we're stupid." I made it a point to remember their names, their interests, their small dramas and triumphs. When Emma Morrison was nervous about her first dance recital, I spent an afternoon helping her practice in our living room. When Jake Sullivan's parents got divorced, I made sure he knew he was always welcome for dinner at our house. When Ashley Chen was having trouble with mean girls at school, I shared strategies that had helped me navigate similar situations when I was her age. I believed that being present and engaged would be enough to ensure that my children never doubted their place in my heart. I thought that the thousands of small acts of love and service would create an unshakable foundation of trust and loyalty. How naive I was to think that love was enough. How foolish to believe that decades of devotion could protect me from being discarded the moment I became inconvenient. But before the betrayal came, the golden years, the period after Robert left when my children and I became an even tighter unit. The divorce had been devastating, not just emotionally, but financially. Robert's child support payments were sporadic at best, and his promises to help with college tuition and other major expenses evaporated, along with his presence in our daily lives. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, working nights and weekends to make ends meet. There were weeks when I survived on 3 or 4 hours of sleep, when I would come home from a 12-hour shift and still need to help with homework, make dinner, and handle the dozen other tasks that single parenthood demanded. But my children rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that both touched and sustained me. Rebecca, then 23 and fresh out of college, moved back home for 6 months to help me navigate the divorce proceedings and figure out how to manage on a single income. She took over paying bills, organizing paperwork, and making sure I didn't forget important appointments in the chaos of our new reality. "We're going to get through this together, Mom," she promised me one night as we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by financial documents and legal papers. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." Michael, just 19 and struggling with his own transition to adulthood, put his college plans on hold to take a year off and help around the house. He painted the entire exterior that summer, learning as he went from YouTube videos and trial and error. He repaired the fence, figured out how to fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, and taught himself basic electrical work because we couldn't afford to hire professionals. "You gave us everything, Mom," he said when I protested that he should be living his own life instead of taking care of me. "Let us give something back to you for once." Sarah, 16 and devastated by her father's abandonment, became my shadow for months. She would curl up next to me on the couch in the evenings, her head on my shoulder, both of us pretending to watch television while we grieved the loss of the family we thought we'd built. She started helping with dinner preparation, learning family recipes that I had never bothered to teach her before because I hadn't realized how important it would be to pass them on. "I'll never leave you like Dad did," she whispered one night, her voice thick with tears and fierce determination. "I promise, Mom. I'll always be here when you need me." For 5 years, we were closer than we'd ever been. The 4 of us against the world, a tight unit that had been tested by betrayal and emerged stronger. We developed our own traditions, our own inside jokes, our own ways of celebrating holidays and handling crises. Christmas became a potluck affair where we each contributed something special. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes and thoughtful, inexpensive gifts that showed how much attention we paid to each other's interests and dreams. I actually convinced myself that Robert's leaving had been a blessing in disguise, that we were better off without his increasingly distant presence and wandering attention. We were building something new and beautiful from the ashes of his betrayal, something stronger because it was based on choice rather than obligation. When Rebecca got married to Tom in 2001, I walked her down the aisle because there was no question about who had earned that honor. She wore my mother's pearl necklace, something old, and carried a bouquet of white roses mixed with the baby's breath that grew wild in our backyard, something borrowed from nature itself. As I placed her hand in Tom's, I felt such overwhelming pride in the strong, capable woman she had become. "Take care of her," I whispered to Tom during the handoff, and his earnest nod told me he understood the magnitude of what he was being entrusted with. When Michael graduated from art school, I was in the front row, crying proud tears as he received his diploma. His professors had mentioned his talent for capturing emotion in his paintings, and I could see it in the piece he had submitted for his senior exhibition, a portrait of our family during one of those Sunday dinners in the years after the divorce, all of us laughing at something silly Rebecca had said. The love in that painting was so tangible you could almost touch it. When Sarah was accepted to nursing school, following in my footsteps, she said with pride, we celebrated with champagne and plans for her to join me at the hospital where I'd worked for 15 years. She talked about working the same shifts I did, about learning from my experience, about carrying on a family tradition of caring for people when they were at their most vulnerable. "I want to be the kind of nurse you are, Mom," she said, her eyes bright with ambition and admiration. "I want patients to feel safe when they see me coming, the way they feel when they see you." But then life started pulling them in different directions, as life always does. Rebecca and Tom bought a house across town and started having babies. First Emma, then Jake, 2 beautiful children who called me Grammy and filled my life with new purpose. Michael moved to Portland for a job at an advertising agency, pursuing his dream of using art to tell stories that mattered. Sarah met David during her clinical rotations and fell head over heels in love with his ambition, his financial stability, his plans for a future that seemed so much more glamorous than anything our humble family could offer. The phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits turned into obligations rather than pleasures. I understood. They had their own lives to build, their own challenges to face. I was proud of their independence, proud that they were confident enough to venture out into the world and make their mark. The foundation we had built during those 5 years after Robert left was strong enough to support them even when distance and time stretched the connections between us. Or so I thought. It was when my own health started to falter that everything changed, and not in the way I had expected or hoped. I had always assumed that if I ever became ill or needed care, the love and loyalty we had built during our years of mutual support would carry us through. I thought my children would rally around me the way they had after the divorce, that they would see caring for their aging mother as an opportunity to repay some of the love I had given them. Instead, my diagnosis became the catalyst for them to distance themselves, as if my illness was a reminder of their own mortality, their own vulnerability, their own potential for becoming burdens that society might prefer to hide away. The first signs were subtle, like hairline cracks in a mirror that you only notice when the light hits them just right. It started with phone calls that felt different, conversations that had lost their natural rhythm and warmth. Rebecca started calling more frequently, but our conversations felt rehearsed, like she was checking items off an invisible list rather than genuinely wanting to connect with me. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she would ask, and there was something clinical in her tone, as if she was conducting a medical assessment rather than having a casual chat with her mother. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired from work," I would respond, and I could practically hear her making mental notes about my energy levels. "Are you remembering to take your medications?" This question always followed, even though I had been managing my own medications for decades without any problems. "Of course I am. I'm not a child, Rebecca." "I know, Mom. I just worry. Sometimes when people get older, they forget things like that, and it can be dangerous." The way she said, "when people get older," made it clear that she had already mentally categorized me as elderly and potentially incompetent, even though I was only 65 and still working full-time as a registered nurse. I had colleagues my age and older who were sharp, capable, and trusted with life and death decisions every day. But in Rebecca's mind, I had already crossed some invisible line into unreliability. "Did you pay the electric bill?" She would continue down her mental checklist. "I know you mentioned last week that you were having trouble with the online banking system." "I don't remember saying that," I would protest, because I distinctly remembered successfully paying all my bills on time, the way I had every month for years. "Oh, but you did mention it, Mom. You said the website was confusing and you couldn't figure out how to navigate the payment page." Even as she said it, doubt would creep in. Had I said that? Was there a conversation I was forgetting? The uncertainty was worse than any actual memory problem, because it made me question everything I thought I knew about my own mental state. These conversations would leave me feeling vaguely anxious and confused, as if I was losing touch with reality in ways I couldn't quite identify. Rebecca had a talent for pointing out small inconsistencies or lapses that, individually, seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a picture of someone who was no longer entirely reliable. "Maybe I could help you set up automatic payments," she would suggest, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine concern. "It would be one less thing for you to worry about." But what I heard was, "You can't be trusted to handle your own finances anymore." Michael's visits became less frequent and more tense. Where we used to spend hours talking about his work at the advertising agency, his latest art projects, his hopes for the future, now he would spend most of his time examining my house like he was conducting a safety inspection. I would catch him checking expiration dates in my refrigerator, looking through my mail for unpaid bills, testing the locks on my doors and windows. "Just making sure everything's secure, Mom," he would say when I asked what he was doing. "You know how crime rates are going up in this neighborhood." But there hadn't been any significant crime in our neighborhood. It was the same safe, quiet street where I had raised 3 children, where neighbors looked out for each other, and where the biggest excitement was usually someone's sprinkler system malfunctioning. I started to feel like I was being surveilled in my own home. Michael would walk through the rooms with the careful attention of someone documenting problems, noting when the living room needed dusting, when the guest bathroom faucet dripped, when the front porch light bulb had burned out. These were normal household maintenance issues that every homeowner deals with, but the way he cataloged them made them feel like evidence of my declining ability to care for myself. The incident with my jewelry box was perhaps the most unsettling. I had come upstairs to get a sweater and found Michael in my bedroom, going through my jewelry box with the methodical thoroughness of someone conducting an inventory. When I appeared in the doorway, he jumped as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't have been doing. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral even though my heart was racing with suspicion and hurt. He quickly snapped the jewelry box shut, his cheeks flushing red. "Just making sure everything's safe, Mom. There have been some break-ins in the neighborhood, and I wanted to check that you don't have anything valuable lying around that might tempt thieves." The explanation sounded reasonable, but something about his demeanor felt wrong. The way he avoided my eyes, the speed with which he moved away from my dresser, the slight tremor in his voice. It all suggested that his motives weren't as innocent as he claimed. "I wasn't aware there had been break-ins," I said carefully, watching his face for any signs of deception. "Oh, just a couple. Nothing major. But you know how these things go. Better safe than sorry." I nodded and smiled, playing along with his charade. But after he left, I checked my jewelry box thoroughly. Everything was there, but somehow it felt different, as if the very act of being examined by someone who didn't trust my ability to protect my own possessions had tainted even the most precious pieces. The pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary, the small diamond earrings I'd bought myself after my first promotion, the simple gold bracelet that had been my mother's, they all felt diminished somehow by the implication that I couldn't be trusted to keep them safe. When I asked my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, about the supposed break-ins, she looked at me with confusion. "Break-ins? No, dear. I haven't heard about any break-ins. This is still one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. Where did you hear that?" I didn't answer, but the confirmation of what I had suspected made my stomach churn. Michael had lied to me. But why? What was he really looking for in my jewelry box? Was he worried about my ability to protect my valuables? Or was he evaluating what assets I had that might need to be managed if I became incapacitated? Sarah's behavior was perhaps the most painful to witness because it represented the most dramatic change from our previous relationship. For years, I had been Grammy to her children, little Emma, now 5, and Jake, 3. I was the one they called when they had nightmares, the one who knew exactly how they liked their grilled cheese sandwiches cut, into triangles for Emma, into strips for Jake, the one who could make them stop crying with a combination of silly faces and improvised songs. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I would pick them up from daycare and bring them to my house for the afternoon. It had become a sacred routine, something that gave structure and purpose to my week. We had established rituals that the children counted on. Chocolate chip cookies fresh from the oven. Emma liked them soft and Jake liked them crispy. Story time in the big chair by the window where all 3 of us could fit comfortably. Art projects that always ended up messier than Sarah would have liked, but that filled my refrigerator with colorful masterpieces. "Grammy! Grammy!" Emma would run to me with her arms outstretched, her face lighting up with pure joy when she saw me waiting for her at daycare pickup. "Guess what happened at school today?" And I would scoop her up, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck with complete trust and love, and listen to her breathless recounting of playground drama and learning adventures. She would tell me about the boy who pulled her hair during circle time, about the new book her teacher had read, about the butterfly they had seen during outdoor play. I hung on every word as if she were sharing state secrets, because to me, her world was endlessly fascinating and important. Jake was quieter, more observant, but he would climb onto my lap during story time and trace the pictures in our books with his tiny finger while I read. His favorite was a book about a little bear who was afraid of the dark, and he would always request it even though we had read it dozens of times. "Again, Grammy," he would say when I finished, his dark eyes serious and hopeful. "Read it again." And I always did. Even when my throat was sore from reading, even when the same book for the 5th time in one afternoon was making me slightly crazy, even when I had dinner to prepare or laundry to fold, I always read it again because the look of contentment on his face was worth any amount of repetition. Those afternoons with Emma and Jake were some of the most precious hours of my week. We would bake cookies together, with more flour ending up on the floor than in the mixing bowl. We would work on art projects, finger painting, crayon drawings, construction paper collages that defied any artistic logic, but were beautiful in their pure creativity. We would have impromptu dance parties in the living room, with me playing music from my childhood while they spun around in circles until they collapsed in giggles. But suddenly, without explanation or warning, the Tuesday and Thursday visits stopped. When I called to ask when I should pick up the children, Sarah always had other arrangements, other people who were apparently more suitable for childcare than their own grandmother. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to tell you. My friend Jessica is watching them today. Her daughter is Emma's age and they love playing together. David's parents are in town, and they're dying to spend time with their grandchildren. You understand, right?" The kids are both fighting colds, and I don't want them passing anything on to you. You know how important it is for someone your age to avoid germs. Each excuse was perfectly reasonable in isolation, but the pattern was unmistakable. I was being phased out of their lives, replaced by more suitable caregivers who didn't carry the liability of unpredictable memory lapses or age-related vulnerabilities. The excuse about germs was particularly stinging because it highlighted how Sarah now saw me, not as the strong, capable woman who had raised her and worked as a nurse for decades, but as a fragile, elderly person who needed protection from the normal risks of daily life. The same children who had been coughing and sneezing on me for years were now somehow too dangerous for me to be around. When I protested, Sarah's responses became increasingly sharp and defensive, as if I was being unreasonable for wanting to maintain my relationship with my own grandchildren. Mom, you have to understand that I have a lot of people who want to help with the kids. David's mother has been complaining that she doesn't see them enough, and my friend Jessica's daughter is going through a shy phase where she needs more playdates. But what about our routines? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Emma was just learning to read with me, and Jake loves our cookie baking sessions. Don't you think it's confusing for them when their schedules keep changing? Children are adaptable, Sarah said, using the cool, professional voice she'd developed during her nursing training. It's actually good for them to have variety in their caregiving experiences. It helps them develop social skills and independence. The subtext was clear. Spending time with their potentially unreliable grandmother was not helping them develop anything positive. I was becoming a risk rather than a resource, a concern rather than a comfort. But what hurt most was the way Emma and Jake started to seem confused when they saw me. Emma, who used to run to me with such enthusiasm, became hesitant and shy, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to be excited to see me. Jake, who had always climbed onto my lap automatically, would look to his mother for permission before approaching me. "Can I hug Grammy?" Emma asked during one brief visit, and the fact that she felt she needed to ask permission broke my heart into tiny pieces. "Of course you can hug Grammy," Sarah said, but her tone suggested that this physical affection was being granted as a special privilege rather than being the natural expression of love it had always been. I could see that the children were picking up on the adults' anxiety about me. They were learning to view their grandmother with caution and uncertainty rather than trust and joy. Whatever Sarah and David were saying about me in private was filtering down to their innocent perception of who I was and what role I was supposed to play in their lives. Phone conversations with all three of my children began to feel orchestrated, as if they were following a script designed to document my cognitive decline rather than genuinely connecting with me. Every call became an assessment, every interaction an opportunity for them to collect more evidence of my supposedly deteriorating mental state. I would start to tell Rebecca about something that had happened, a conversation with a neighbor, a problem at work, an interesting article I'd read in the newspaper, and she would cut me off mid-sentence with that particular tone that people use when they're correcting someone who's made an embarrassing mistake. "Mom, you told me that yesterday." "Mom, that was last week. Don't you remember?" "Mom, we already discussed this. You called me about it on Tuesday." Even when I was certain I hadn't shared the story before, when I could clearly remember thinking about calling to tell her, but deciding to wait until I had more details, she would insist I had already told her. The certainty in her voice made me doubt my own memory, made me wonder if I was losing track of our conversations in ways that I wasn't aware of. The gaslighting was subtle but relentless. They would reference conversations I was sure we'd never had, claim I'd made statements I knew I hadn't made, insist I'd forgotten appointments or commitments that I was certain I remembered clearly. Each incident was small enough to dismiss individually, but collectively they created a narrative of unreliability that began to undermine my confidence in my own perceptions. "I think you should consider seeing a doctor," Rebecca said one afternoon when I called to confirm plans for Sunday dinner, plans that she claimed we'd never made, though I distinctly remembered discussing them the previous week when she had mentioned wanting to try a new recipe for pot roast. "There's nothing wrong with me that a good night's sleep wouldn't fix," I insisted, but even as I said it, I felt uncertain. Was I really forgetting things, or were they making me think I was forgetting things? "Mom, memory issues can be a sign of serious health problems," Rebecca continued in her most reasonable, caring voice. "Wouldn't you rather catch something early, if there's something to catch? Prevention is always better than waiting until there's a crisis." The way she said it made it sound like she was looking out for my best interests, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was building a case against me. Every forgotten detail, every moment of confusion, Every time I couldn't immediately recall a name or date, it all went into an invisible file that would eventually be used to prove that I was no longer competent to manage my own life. "We just want what's best for you," Michael would say when I questioned their increasing involvement in my daily affairs. "We love you too much to watch you struggle when there might be help available." But the help they offered always seemed to involve taking away another piece of my independence, another aspect of my autonomy. "Don't drive at night. Don't handle your own banking. Don't answer the phone when you're unsure who's calling." Each suggestion was wrapped in love and concern, but the cumulative effect was to make me feel like a child who couldn't be trusted with adult responsibilities. The most insidious part was how they made me complicit in my own diminishment. When I protested or questioned their assessment of my capabilities, they would exchange those looks, the ones that said, "See, this is exactly what we were worried about. She doesn't even recognize that she needs help." Those looks were almost worse than the restrictions themselves. They communicated a shared understanding that I was no longer reliable, no longer the person they had once trusted and respected. I had become a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained, a source of potential embarrassment that needed to be carefully controlled. Family photos began disappearing from their homes, and this was perhaps the most insidious form of erasure because it happened so gradually and with such plausible explanations that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The process was like watching someone slowly edit me out of the story of our family, removing evidence of my presence and importance one frame at a time. During visits to Rebecca's house, I would notice subtle changes that took me a while to identify. The framed photo from Sarah's high school graduation, the one where we were all laughing at something ridiculous Tom had said, our faces bright with genuine joy and connection, was no longer on the mantelpiece where it had sat for years. In that photo, I was wearing the blue dress Sarah had helped me pick out, and my arm was around her shoulders in a gesture of maternal pride that had captured the essence of our relationship during those happier years. "Where did the graduation picture go?" I asked casually, trying not to let my concern show. "Oh, we're redecorating," Rebecca said, without looking up from the magazine she was reading. "I moved a bunch of stuff to the bedroom. You know how cluttered the living room was getting." But when I casually glanced into her bedroom during my visit, ostensibly looking for the bathroom but really searching for evidence of the missing photos, the graduation picture wasn't there either, and it never reappeared in any other location during subsequent visits. Other photos followed the same pattern of mysterious disappearance. The candid shot from Emma's second birthday party, where I was helping her blow out the candles while chocolate frosting decorated her chubby cheeks, vanished from the kitchen counter where it had been displayed. The family portrait from our last Christmas together before Robert left, where we were all wearing matching red sweaters that I had bought on sale and coordinated weeks in advance, disappeared from the hallway wall. Each missing photo represented a lost piece of evidence that I had been an integral part of this family's story. The images that remained told a carefully curated version of their history, one where I appeared occasionally, but always informal, posed situations where I looked appropriately maternal, but not central to the narrative. At Michael's apartment, the process was even more systematic. He had always been artistic, and his living room featured a carefully designed gallery wall of family photographs, arranged in a way that told the story of his life and relationships. Over the years, I had watched him add new images, photos from art school, pictures with girlfriends, shots from vacations and career milestones. But gradually, the photos that featured me began to disappear from his curated collection. The picture of us at his college graduation, where I was beaming with pride while he showed off his diploma, was quietly removed. The snapshot from the hiking trip we had taken together the summer after his father left, where we were both muddy and exhausted but grinning at the camera, vanished from its prominent position. "I'm going for a more minimalist look," he explained when I asked about the missing photos. "Too many pictures make the space feel cluttered, and I want the apartment to feel more grown up and sophisticated." But the pictures that remained told a specific story. Successful moments from his career, artistic achievements, romantic relationships. The messy, authentic moments that captured our family's real life, the ones that showed love and connection rather than accomplishment and status, were systematically eliminated. What hurt most was that the photos being removed weren't just random family snapshots. They were the images that captured genuine emotion, authentic connection, moments when the love between us was most visible. A stranger looking at Michael's gallery wall would see a successful young man with an impressive career and an active social life. They wouldn't see any evidence of the mother who had supported his artistic dreams, who had driven him to art classes every weekend, who had believed in his talent even when he doubted it himself. At Sarah's house, the process was even more obvious because she had always been the family member most committed to documenting our lives. Her refrigerator had once been covered with a constantly changing display of children's artwork, family snapshots, and casual photos that captured the everyday moments of raising young children. The kitchen counters were usually cluttered with photo albums, boxes of printed pictures waiting to be organized, and the various cameras and phones she used to document every milestone and memory. But gradually, the visual evidence of our extended family relationships began to disappear. The refrigerator became increasingly bare, displaying only the children's current artwork and school schedules. The photo albums that had been prominently displayed on the coffee table, thick books filled with years of family memories, disappeared into storage boxes in the garage. "I'm trying to get more organized," Sarah explained when I asked about the missing albums. "I want to make sure all our photos are properly digitized and backed up. You know how easy it is to lose physical photos in a fire or flood or some other disaster." "That sounds smart," I agreed. "When do you think the digital versions will be ready? I'd love to see them on your computer." "Oh, it's going to take a while," she said vaguely. "There are thousands of photos to scan, and I want to organize them properly by date and event. It's a huge project." But months passed, and the digital versions never materialized. When I asked to see progress on the scanning project, Sarah would deflect with explanations about how busy she was, how complicated the software was, how she wanted to wait until she had time to do it properly. I began to suspect that the photos weren't being preserved at all, but rather sorted into those worth keeping, the ones that showed Sarah's nuclear family looking happy and successful, and those that could be discarded, the ones that included me too prominently or showed our family during less polished moments. The most painful discovery came when I was helping Sarah clean out her basement storage room. I offered to help because she had mentioned being overwhelmed by the amount of stuff they had accumulated, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to spend time together while being useful. Hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old furniture, I found a garbage bag filled with framed photographs. When I looked inside, my heart nearly stopped. These were all pictures that featured me prominently, photos from birthdays and holidays, casual family gatherings, moments when I was clearly central to whatever celebration or milestone was being documented. "Sarah," I called out, my voice shaking, "what are these photos doing in a garbage bag?" She appeared at my shoulder and looked into the bag with what seemed like genuine surprise, as if she had forgotten the photos were there. "Oh, those," she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I was going through everything and organizing. Some of the frames were broken, and I wasn't sure what to do with the pictures themselves. I was going to ask you if you wanted them, but I could see that none of the frames were broken. These were simply photos that didn't fit the narrative she wanted to preserve, images that showed me as an active, engaged grandmother and mother, rather than the increasingly peripheral figure I was becoming in their current story. I rescued those photos and took them home with me, but the damage to my trust was irreversible. My own daughter had been literally throwing away evidence of my importance in the family's history, treating decades of memories like they were disposable clutter rather than precious documentation of the love we had shared. The rules and restrictions started appearing with increasing frequency, each one presented as a reasonable suggestion for my own safety and well-being, but collectively forming a cage that grew smaller with each passing month. "Mom, I really think you should let me sort through your mail for you," Rebecca announced during one of her increasingly frequent check-ins at my house. She said it casually, as if she was offering to help with a burdensome chore rather than taking over a basic adult responsibility. "I've been managing my own mail for 65 years, I protested, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "I think I can tell the difference between a real bill and a scam letter. But some of them are getting so sophisticated now," she insisted, pulling out her phone to show me news articles about elderly fraud victims. "Even smart people get fooled by these schemes. They use official-looking letterheads and language that mimics real businesses. Sometimes they even copy the design of legitimate bills." The way she said "even smart people" with that particular emphasis made it clear that she no longer considered me to be in that category. I had been reclassified as a vulnerable person who needed protection from my own poor judgment. "What if someone important tries to reach me?" I asked. "What if there's an emergency or time-sensitive information?" "I'll check everything daily and bring you anything important immediately," she promised. And if there's ever a real emergency, people know to call you directly rather than sending mail. The arrangement sounded reasonable when she explained it, but the reality was different. Rebecca would show up once or twice a week with a small stack of items she deemed worthy of my attention, usually just bills and appointment reminders. When I asked about magazines I subscribed to or letters from friends, she would say they hadn't arrived or that she was handling them separately. I later discovered that she had contacted my bank, my insurance company, and several other businesses to change my mailing address to her house, claiming that I had requested the change due to mail theft in my neighborhood. I only found out when a friend mentioned that a birthday card she had sent to me had been returned to her as undeliverable. "Don't answer the phone if you don't recognize the number," Michael advised during his next visit. "Scammers are getting really aggressive about targeting seniors, and they're trained to take advantage of people who might be confused or uncertain about what they're being asked to do." "What if it's someone I know calling from a different number?" I asked. "What if it's an emergency and someone is trying to reach me from a hospital or police station?" "If it's really an emergency, they'll find a way to reach you," he said dismissively. "Emergency services have ways of getting through when they need to. The important thing is not to engage with potential scammers who are trained to manipulate vulnerable people." Again, the implication was clear. I was vulnerable and easily manipulated, unable to trust my own judgment when it came to basic interactions with the outside world. But the phone restriction had consequences that Michael hadn't considered, or perhaps didn't care about. When my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, fell and broke her hip, she tried to call me from the hospital using a number I didn't recognize. Because I followed Michael's advice and didn't answer, I missed the opportunity to visit her and offer support during a frightening and lonely time. When my college roommate called to tell me about her cancer diagnosis, she had to try multiple times over several days before I finally answered. By then, she was hurt and confused about why I seemed to be avoiding her calls. "I've been trying to reach you for a week," she said when I finally picked up. "I thought maybe something had happened to you, or that you were angry with me about something." I had to explain the phone restriction, which made me sound exactly like the confused elderly woman my children seemed to think I was becoming. My friend was polite about it, but I could hear the concern in her voice, not just for my health, but for my independence and autonomy. "I don't think you should drive at night anymore," Sarah announced during a Sunday dinner that had become increasingly tense and awkward. "It's just not safe for someone your age. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be, and your vision might not be as sharp in low-light conditions." "My vision is fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I had an eye exam just 6 months ago, and the doctor didn't mention any problems with night driving. He said my prescription was barely changed from the previous year." "But things can change quickly at your age, Mom," Sarah said with the kind of patience you might use with a stubborn child who refuses to accept an obvious truth. "What was safe 6 months ago might not be safe now. And even if your vision is technically fine, your reaction time might be slower, or you might get more easily confused by oncoming headlights." "I've been driving for almost 50 years, I pointed out. "I've never had an accident, never gotten a ticket for unsafe driving. Don't you think I would notice if I was becoming dangerous on the road?" "Sometimes people don't notice changes in their own abilities," David interjected, speaking up for the first time during the conversation. "It's like how you can't see your hair growing day by day, but over time there's a significant change. Driving skills can deteriorate gradually in ways that aren't immediately obvious to the person experiencing them." The fact that David, someone who had married into our family and had no history with me as a driver, felt entitled to weigh in on my driving abilities was particularly galling. But Sarah nodded at his words, as if he had provided expert testimony rather than speculative opinion. "What if I agree to only drive to places I know well?" I suggested, trying to find a compromise. "The grocery store, the church, Rebecca's house, routes I've driven hundreds of times?" "It's not about familiarity with the route," Sarah insisted. "It's about your ability to react quickly to unexpected situations. What if a child runs into the street? What if another driver does something unpredictable? What if there's construction or an accident that requires you to navigate around obstacles?" Each restriction felt reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a web of limitations that was slowly strangling my independence. I couldn't manage my own mail, couldn't answer my own phone, couldn't drive when I needed to. The cumulative effect was to make me feel like a child who needed constant supervision and protection from the dangerous world of adult responsibilities. But the most insidious part was how the restrictions fed on each other. Because I couldn't drive at night, I became more dependent on others for transportation to evening events. which reinforced their perception that I was becoming helpless. Because I wasn't receiving my own mail, I missed invitations and announcements that would have kept me connected to my broader social network. Because I wasn't answering my phone reliably, friends and acquaintances began to stop calling, which made my world smaller and more isolated. Each limitation led to consequences that seemed to justify even more limitations. My children could point to my increasing dependence and isolation as evidence that their restrictions were necessary, without acknowledging that they had created the conditions that made me appear more helpless than I actually was. "We're just trying to keep you safe," Rebecca would say when I protested. "We love you too much to watch you take unnecessary risks." But safety, I was learning, could become a prison when it was defined by other people's fears, rather than your own assessment of your capabilities. They were keeping me safe from living my own life, safe from making my own decisions, safe from the dignity that comes with being treated as a competent adult, even when that competence might be imperfect. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was looking for my reading glasses, which seemed to have developed a habit of wandering around the house like mischievous spirits. I had searched the usual places, the kitchen counter, my bedside table, the bathroom sink, when I decided to check Rebecca's old room upstairs. Maybe I had left them there during one of my increasingly rare visits to the upper floor. As I opened her bedroom door, the hinges creaked with the sound of time and neglect. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Rebecca's room had been left largely untouched since she moved out 15 years ago, like a shrine to her childhood that I couldn't bear to dismantle. Band posters still clung to the walls, and her collection of ceramic horses lined the windowsill. But it wasn't nostalgia that stopped me in my tracks. It was the sound of voices coming from below, my children's voices, low and urgent, drifting up through the heating vents. They were having a meeting in my own living room, and I hadn't been invited. "We can't keep putting this off." Rebecca's voice carried the sharp edge of impatience. "She's getting worse. Last week she asked me the same question 4 times in 10 minutes. Maybe it's not as bad as we think," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes people just forget things when they're stressed." "Open your eyes, Michael." Sarah's voice was cold, clinical. "She called me at 2 in the morning last month asking if I was okay because she thought I was still living in that apartment I moved out of 6 years ago. She's losing it, and we need to make decisions before she becomes completely incompetent." The word incompetent hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "The wedding is in 3 months," Sarah continued. "I can't have her there if she's going to cause a scene. What if she gets confused during the ceremony? What if she starts talking to people who aren't there? David's family doesn't know about her condition, and I want to keep it that way." "So what are you suggesting?" Rebecca asked. "I'm suggesting we don't invite her." The silence that followed was deafening. I waited for Michael to protest, for Rebecca to defend me, for someone to remember that I was their mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise them. Instead, I heard the rustle of papers and the clink of coffee cups. "How do we explain it to her?" Michael finally asked. "We don't," Rebecca said. "We tell her it's a small ceremony, family only. She won't remember the details anyway." "That's cruel," Michael whispered. "What's cruel is letting her embarrass herself and us," Sarah shot back. "I've worked too hard for this perfect wedding to let her Alzheimer's ruin it." I must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, something, because the conversation stopped abruptly. I heard footsteps moving toward the stairs, and I scrambled to get out of Rebecca's room before they could discover me eavesdropping on my own exclusion. But the damage was done. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the old house settle around me, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The mother in me was dying, being systematically murdered by the people I had loved most in the world. They saw me as a burden, an embarrassment, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. The diagnosis had come 6 months earlier, delivered by a doctor who spoke in careful, measured tones about early-stage Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. Yes, I sometimes forgot where I put things. Yes, I occasionally struggled to find the right word during conversations. Yes, recent memories seemed to slip away more easily than they used to, but I was still me. I still remembered every bedtime story I had ever told, every scraped knee I had kissed better, every proud moment at school plays and graduation ceremonies. My children had received the diagnosis like a death sentence, not just for me, but for the relationships we had built over decades. Instead of rallying around me, supporting me through this frightening journey, they began treating me like I had already died and left behind a troublesome ghost who looked like their mother, but was really just a shell of confusion and embarrassment. The weeks leading up to Sarah's wedding were the darkest of my life. I watched them make preparations, listened to excited phone calls about flowers and catering, saw Rebecca shopping for a mother-of-the-bride dress, for herself, not for me. They had rewritten the family narrative, casting themselves as the responsible adults who would graciously stand in for their incompetent mother. I had become a non-person in my own family, but in the depths of that despair, something else began to grow. Not acceptance. I would never accept being discarded like yesterday's newspaper, but a fierce determination to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. They thought my Alzheimer's made me weak, confused, easily dismissed. They had forgotten that before I became their mother, I was Margaret Elena Rodriguez, the woman who had put herself through nursing school while working 2 jobs, who had stood up to doctors twice her age when they tried to intimidate her, who had raised 3 children as a single mother for 5 years when their father ran off with his secretary. They wanted to hide me away because they thought I would embarrass them. Instead, I would give them something to remember me by. The idea came to me while I was going through old photo albums, something I did more frequently these days as a way to anchor myself to memories that felt increasingly fragile. I found a picture from Sarah's 10th birthday party. She was wearing a bright yellow dress with sunflowers on it. Her face lit up with pure joy as she blew out the candles on a cake I had spent 3 hours decorating. In that moment, captured forever in fading color, she was still my little girl who believed her mommy could fix anything. But it was what I found tucked behind the photo that changed everything. A letter, written in Sarah's careful 10-year-old handwriting, the kind of letter a child writes to their parent but never sends because the emotions are too big, too scary to put into words. The paper was yellowed with age, the pencil marks faded but still legible. "Dear Mommy, I know you are sad because Daddy left. I heard you crying in your room last night. I want you to know that I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and I will never leave you. You are the best mommy in the whole world, and I will take care of you when you get old, just like you take care of me now. You don't have to be sad anymore because you have me and Rebecca and Michael, and we love you forever and ever. Love, Sarah." I held that letter in my trembling hands and sobbed until I had no tears left. This was my daughter, the little girl who had promised to take care of me when I got old. This was the child who had seen my pain and wanted to heal it with her love. Somewhere along the way, that compassionate little girl had been replaced by a woman who was embarrassed by her own mother's illness, who valued appearance over loyalty, who could look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't welcome at the most important day of her life. But Sarah's 10-year-old promise gave me an idea for the gift I would leave for her. I spent weeks planning every detail. First, I visited my lawyer, old Mr. Peterson, who had handled our family's legal matters for 20 years. He was one of the few people who still treated me with dignity, who looked me in the eye when we spoke and didn't talk over me or around me like I wasn't there. "Margaret," he said, when I explained what I wanted to do, "are you sure about this? It's quite dramatic." "They think I'm losing my mind, Harold," I told him. "They think I'm too confused to know what's happening around me. It's time to show them just how clearly I see everything." Next, I visited the small printing shop downtown, where I had gotten invitations made for countless birthday parties and school events over the years. Mrs. Chen behind the counter smiled when she saw me come in. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how wonderful to see you. What can we help you with today?" I handed her the carefully written instructions, watching her face change as she read through what I wanted printed. Her eyes widened, and she looked up at me with surprise and something that might have been admiration. "You want this exactly as written?" she asked. "Every word," I confirmed. "Can you have it ready by Friday?" "Of course. And Mrs. Rodriguez? Good for you." The wedding was on Saturday afternoon at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where I had celebrated my own 25th wedding anniversary before my husband decided he preferred his secretary's company to mine. I knew the layout well, knew about the side entrance that the catering staff used, knew that there would be a brief window between the ceremony and reception when the wedding party would be taking photographs and the guests would be having cocktails on the terrace. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing the navy blue dress I had worn to Rebecca's college graduation, the one that made me feel elegant and dignified. I styled my hair the way I used to for special occasions, applied lipstick with a steady hand, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a mother who should be attending her daughter's wedding, not hiding at home like a shameful secret. The country club was bustling with activity when I arrived. I parked at the far end of the lot and sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage. In my purse was the gift I had prepared, carefully wrapped in white paper with a silver bow. It looked innocent enough, the kind of present that might contain jewelry or a thoughtful keepsake. No one would suspect what was really inside. I walked through the side entrance like I belonged there, nodding politely to the catering staff who were too busy with their preparations to question an elegantly dressed older woman. The reception hall was being set up with round tables covered in crisp white linens, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and baby's breath. At the head of the room was the bridal party table, elevated slightly on a small platform so the bride and groom could look out over their guests. Sarah's chair was obvious. It was positioned at the exact center of the head table, draped with extra white satin and adorned with a small bouquet of white orchids. This was where my daughter would sit as a bride, basking in the love and attention of everyone who mattered to her. Everyone except her mother. I placed my gift on Sarah's chair with trembling hands. It looked perfect there, as if it had always belonged in that spot. A mother's wedding gift to her daughter, delivered with love, even if that love was no longer welcomed or appreciated. I didn't stay to see the ceremony. I drove home and waited. The call came at 7:30 that evening. Rebecca's voice was shaking with rage and something else. Maybe fear, maybe shock. "What did you do?" she demanded without any greeting. "I left a wedding gift for my daughter," I said calmly. "Isn't that what mothers do? Do you have any idea what you've caused?" Sarah collapsed when she opened it. "She's been crying for hours. The reception is ruined. David's family is asking questions we can't answer." "What questions are those?" I asked, though I knew exactly what questions they were asking. "They want to know where you were, why the mother of the bride wasn't at the wedding. What kind of family excludes their own mother from such an important day?" I felt a small, fierce satisfaction bloom in my chest. "And what are you telling them?" "The truth," Rebecca said, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. "That we made a terrible mistake." The gift I had left on Sarah's chair was a photo album, but not the kind filled with happy memories and smiling faces. It was a collection of documents, carefully compiled and professionally bound. The first page was a copy of my Alzheimer's diagnosis, showing that I was in the early stages with mild cognitive impairment, but still fully capable of making my own decisions and understanding my circumstances. The second page was a copy of the letter from my doctor, written at my request, confirming that while I did have some memory issues, I was not the confused, incompetent person my children seemed to believe I was. I was still mentally sharp enough to live independently, manage my own affairs, and certainly attend my daughter's wedding without causing the kind of scene they seemed to fear. The third page was a printout of the phone conversation I had recorded using the small device Mr. Peterson had recommended. It was completely legal. In our state, only one party needs to consent to recording a phone call, and I had consented to recording my own conversation with Sarah. The audio file was also saved on a flash drive included in the album, in case anyone wanted to hear the actual words, but it was the fourth page that contained the real devastation. It was a photo of the letter 10-year-old Sarah had written to me all those years ago, promising to take care of me when I got old, promising never to leave me. Below the photo, I had written in my clearest handwriting, "This is the daughter I raised. This is the woman I thought would stand by me when I needed her most. This is the promise that was broken when you decided I was too embarrassing to include in your special day." The final pages contained copies of all the family photos that had been quietly removed from their homes, along with dates and locations where I had noticed they were missing. The message was clear. I had been paying attention. I had been documenting their systematic erasure of me from their lives. My Alzheimer's didn't make me blind to their betrayal. On the very last page, I had included a new letter, written in my own hand. "To my daughter Sarah on your wedding day. I wanted to be here to celebrate with you, to dance at your reception, to give you my blessing as you start this new chapter of your life. Instead, I am at home, uninvited to my own daughter's wedding because you are ashamed of my illness. You have forgotten who I am. I am not just a woman with Alzheimer's disease. I am the mother who held you when you had nightmares, who taught you to ride a bicycle, who sat through every piano recital and school play even when I was exhausted from working double shifts. I am the woman who sacrificed everything to give you the life you wanted, who believed that love and loyalty were stronger than any illness. You have also forgotten who you used to be. You were the little girl who promised to take care of me when I got old. You were the daughter who saw my pain and wanted to heal it with your love. That little girl would be heartbroken to see what you have become. I am including this album not to ruin your wedding day, but to remind you that actions have consequences. When you chose to exclude me, you didn't just hurt me. You revealed something about yourself that your new husband and his family deserve to know. You are capable of abandoning the person who gave you life when that person becomes inconvenient. I hope someday you remember the daughter you used to be. I hope someday you understand that love isn't supposed to come with conditions and expiration dates. I hope someday you realize what you have lost. With all the love I have left to give, your mother, Margaret Elena Rodriguez P.S. I may have Alzheimer's, but I remember everything that matters. I remember raising you. I remember loving you. And I will never forget how you repaid that love. Sarah called me 3 days after the wedding. Her voice was small and broken, nothing like the confident woman who had told me I wasn't welcome at her special day. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." I let the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of all the words that had been spoken and all the ones that should have been said. "David's parents asked where you were," she continued. "They wanted to meet you, to thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter. When I told them, when I had to explain, they were horrified. David was horrified. They couldn't understand how we could exclude our own mother from the wedding." "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "The truth, that we were wrong, that we let fear make us cruel, that we forgot you were still our mother, still the woman who raised us, still deserving of love and respect, no matter what illness you're facing." I closed my eyes, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: validation. For so long, they had made me feel like I was losing my mind, like my perceptions were unreliable, like my hurt feelings were just symptoms of my disease. Having someone else, multiple someone else's, confirm that their behavior was wrong gave me back something I thought I had lost forever: trust in my own judgment. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the wedding. This is about how you've all been treating me since my diagnosis, like I'm already gone. Like the woman you knew and loved has been replaced by someone embarrassing and incompetent." "I know," she sobbed. "We were so scared, Mom. When the doctor told us about the Alzheimer's, it felt like we were losing you all at once. Instead of helping you through it, we started pulling away because it hurt too much to watch. But I'm still here," I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in months. "I'm still your mother. Yes, I have this disease, and yes, it will probably get worse. But right now, today, I am still Margaret Rodriguez. I still remember your first steps and your first words. I still know how to love you even when you don't know how to love me back." The conversation opened a door that had been slammed shut months ago. Rebecca and Michael called later that week, their own apologies stumbling over each other in their haste to be forgiven. We had a family meeting, a real one this time, with me included, where we talked about their fears and my needs, about how to navigate this disease together instead of letting it drive us apart. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of frustration, still times when my memory failed me and their patience wore thin. But something fundamental had changed. They stopped treating me like I was already gone and started helping me be present for whatever time we had left together. 6 months later, Sarah asked me to help her plan a vow renewal ceremony. "I want to do it right this time," she said. "I want my mother there." I sat in the front row at that small, intimate ceremony, wearing a corsage that Sarah had chosen specifically for me. When the minister asked who gave this woman to be married, Sarah turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "My mother gives me to you, with her blessing and her love." It was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. The gift I had left on Sarah's chair that day wasn't just an album full of uncomfortable truths. It was a mirror, forcing my children to see themselves as they really were, and to decide who they wanted to be going forward. It was a wake-up call that relationships require tending, that love isn't just a feeling but a choice you make every day, even when that choice is difficult. Most importantly, it was a reminder that having Alzheimer's doesn't mean I stopped being a person worthy of respect, dignity, and inclusion in the lives of the people I love. It means I need more patience, more understanding, more grace, but it doesn't mean I need less love. My memory may be failing, but my heart remembers everything that truly matters. And what matters is this: family doesn't end when someone gets sick. Love doesn't stop when life gets complicated. And a mother's love, even a mother with Alzheimer's, is still powerful enough to change everything. Today, as I sit in my house on Maple Street surrounded by photos that have been returned to their rightful places, I know that I won this battle not with cruelty, but with truth, not with revenge, but with love that refused to be dismissed or forgotten. I may be losing my memories, but I gained back my family, and that I will never forget.